Studying composition is, of course, learning by doing. The students write piece by piece and thus, step by step, come closer and closer to their own sound, to their own aesthetics. They learn to have something to say and are able to express it. On this path, however, it seems to make sense, not unlike learning to play an instrument, to also focus on specific techniques, aesthetic questions, hitherto untried experiments, in the form of short etudes. Both in individual and group lessons, this can be an instructive way. By building a compositional repertoire through these exercises, students can access these techniques and skills in their own work. During this lecture, I'll be presenting and discussing composition etudes that I and my students, some are here also, have developed. We have a bi-weekly colloquium, and for each lesson the students bring their solution for the given etude, and we then listen to them together and discuss them. Compose a psychological piece. As a sound file, maximum 90 seconds. So that's always the restriction, that in order to listen to all of them, it should be sound files, and they should be short, that we have the time to listen to all of them. And also it should be short, since it should really focus on the given task. Yeah? So what does it mean? Psychological piece, of course, first of all, very open. Yeah? So it means learn from books what psychology is. Maybe choose a specific discipline out of it. And then the others will first have to guess what your psychological approach was or could have been. And you will have to explain, hence. I mean, you is the composer, the one who has to do the etude. Yeah? So the goal is to learn something about psychological effects in music, or also in composing. Yeah? Composing itself has its psychology. And so then the students, well, we did this etude already, yes, made then pieces which were about the psychology of perception, about group psychology, about cognitive dissonance, or also concretely on a personal experience of anxiety, etc. Compose a natural piece or a biological piece. Always sound file, maximum 90 seconds. Learn what the philosophical term second nature means, and learn about biological processes, algorithms, and proportions. Since I think it's not so common anymore that people will make a song about the sun or the sea, biology or nature nowadays may mean even bioalgorithms or so. So again, read books about these things, and also about the rather problematic concept of what is actually nature, or what is then what Adorno called the second nature, the quasi-nature we have as cultural beings also incorporated. Compose a bad piece. So learn from books, but no. Invest a lot of effort into this task. So the interesting paradox here is that putting a lot of effort into this job will maybe give us a result that in the end this is maybe not a bad piece. No? If you really try to make a good bad piece, yeah? In the end it seems even not possible to make a bad piece, because when you succeed to make a bad piece, it's a success and it's then a good piece. No? How is it almost possible to make a bad piece? Yeah? So maybe the variation would be don't invest a lot of effort into that. That was really a very entertaining lesson, I think my students recall. But yeah, but it was also interesting, at least for me, surprising that we found a kind of consensus that we have. I mean, this is about standards of quality. Yeah? So in the end, it was somewhat surprising that we have a kind of consensus that bad technical quality or poor sound quality, technical inadequacy, annoying repetitions, stale aesthetic effects. You can, of course, want that, but it's already clear that that's bad to begin with. Yeah? Only on a higher level do we get to what Shakespeare has the three witches utter at the beginning of Macbeth. Beautiful is ugly, and ugly is beautiful. That's how it's translated in German. The original is fair and foul, and fair is foul, and foul is fair. Yeah? But there is a certain consensus what we call in music bad, even in new music. Compose a piece without listening to it while composing. The Beethoven etude. Yeah? Credits go to Niklas Torbaben, who he invented this deaf tapes concept. As usual, do not make recordings for it. Only use existing sound files or synthesized sound, and do not listen to any of these materials. Do all compositional work without listening to it. Please be honest about that. So, of course, I can't control that, what you do at home. We will then listen to your pieces for the first time together, and before you will have to describe what will or may happen in the piece. And content-wise, it's absolutely free. Try to create a good piece. So what's the point here? Why should one limit yourself like that? But it is about how well do you know your tools? How well can you conceptualize, compose a piece in your imagination? How good are you in reading visual representations of sound on the computer? And how predictable can, or should be a musical work? And it's also a creativity strategy. For example, the composer Johannes was originally a trained architect, and so he was very skilled in writing sketches, architectural sketches. And it was actually for him, his strategy that he kind of composed the piece first by drawing lines on paper, and only in the next step he tried to apply this then to sound. Yeah? But kind of first a kind of unmusical approach, or a graphical approach to it. And for composers, I think it's very good to have a training for the imagination and for reading also graphic representations of sound. Or maybe you're in a situation in the train or so and you don't have headphones, but you want to work, then you have to work with sound in your head, but with whatever imaginative music you can then create. And it may also be a suggestion for composers to not compose so much at the piano. Or from audio design, I know that students often, the work is that they listen to it, change it, listen, change again, and play back again, now I change this. Always this back and forth, which of course sounds, first of all, it's meaningful to, of course, to listen to what you're doing and make corrections. But then you're already in this too direct, you lose a kind of overview. Yeah? And when you make a 60-minute piece or whatever, a 3-hour piece, then you cannot always play it back from the beginning, and then make corrections, then play it back 3 hours. You have to sometimes abstract from it, and imagine how it is these 3 hours, and on that basis, or with the help of whatever visual representations, you should be able also to work on sound. Who is interested, therefore also I once wrote this essay, Das Partiturparadigma in der neuen Zeitschrift für Musik, 2018. Nevertheless, I would normally say, of course, composers should listen to what they're doing. They should try to make, however, sonic representations with the help of samples, with recordings, tryouts. So it's not an instruction for, in the end, it's the best to write without listening to it. No. But for an etude, I think it's absolutely worth doing. Invent a composer's biography and compose a piece of this author. Or alternatively, it's you, but with a completely different mindset. A lot of benefits I see in this etude is going beyond one's identity, dissolving boundaries, gaining a freedom, and it's also a creativity strategy. Or also interesting is, it's actually also for the listener interesting. Normally we are so used to that we listen to Beethoven, this is Beethoven, or we listen to this Aydin, we want to hear the piece of Aydin, of Michele. We identify the music very often, very strongly to the author, that's what we hear. We hear now how good iodine can compose music. Yeah? Whereas when we make such a construction, okay, now this is the biography composer. His mother came from Jamaica, his father from Japan, but they met in New York. But then he grew up in Texas and got studied in Europe. What music comes then from this out of this biography? So that's really very different listening also. Yeah? And it is a certain awareness of the sociology of music, yeah? When you have such a background, to make clear to which degree your background determines what music you then, what comes into your mind, what your imagination, your fantasy provides you. It certainly has to do with your biographical background. Also, this might be good for, it can happen that later in your professional life as a composer, you may have to do a job for money where you make whatever music for commercials, but that's not something you want to do as I want to do as the composer Johannes Kreidler. But I have to earn money, so I use a pseudonym. Yeah? So I also invent a kind of a biography. I invent an alter ego, and with this pseudonym I do these money jobs, but I'm not endangering my reputation as the composer Johannes Kreidler. Yeah? Or it may also be interesting for, it's maybe a bit of traditional thinking, but when you write an opera and you have different characters, yeah, that you musically, you're able to really think of which music fits to Papageno, which music fits to Tamino. Yeah. Mozart was a master of musical characterization of these different types. So really to thinking of, now I'm making a music which is a Papageno music. Yeah. So it's an etude of empathy. Yeah. And a question of identity and authorial identification in general. So this also opens the hot potato in terms of identity politics, which then could be discussed. Yeah? And anyway, this practice of a pseudonym in art history is a common thing. Like Marcel Duchamp invented this alter ego, Rose c'est la vie, for instance. Yeah. Tell a story with sounds, no language. As usual in our sound file. Variation, an abstract version of it, or two parallel stories, or a drama in 8 seconds, or only with pitches and durations. So here's the first question, what is the definition of narration anyway? In a novel, it's kind of clear we have a protagonist or several protagonists and a dramatic conflict and so on. But in music, is music narrative? Do we think of music as a narrative? Or there are composers who do. For instance, Messiaen, I was found kind of bizarre that when Messiaen described his muse, he often speaks, so then this happens, and then the angel comes, and the trombones, and whatever. Yeah, I don't listen to that music that way, but the composer did. So interesting. And do we feel that the world is a world of narratives, of narration? So that's then a meta discussion. But the first issue is how can at all with sounds, but no language, so no spoken words, can with sound a story be told? And even more extreme, if it's only pitches and durations, for instance, also piano. And question is, what concrete means of sound are available to us for narrating something quasi like a text? I was interested in that more. That was topic of my inauguration lecture here, Begriffliches Hören, Conceptual Listening, 2020. The video is online. And the opposite would be maybe a piece as abstract as possible. Or alternative thought, a piece which avoids all understanding and meaning. If that's possible, yeah, that's was the etude, the question, the task, the challenge. Can we do something? It seems that normally it's much more the problem that we want to be understood. You know, we want to create something which conveys something and which expresses something, which touches people. But we can make an etude out of it also the other way around. How it would be to make something as impossible to understand as possible. How does it turn out? I mean, abstraction has been the promise of freedom, of modernity, whereas today it's rather under suspicion of an ideology, but for sure a topic worth discussing via such an etude. Compose a very personal or private piece. Will this be interesting for the others, or will it be embarrassing? Do you like composing such a piece? Do you like listening to such a piece, or such pieces? Why is there so often the word intimate used when talking about some art? Oh, a concert with such an intimate experience, and so very often used in advertising concerts. So this is the time to speak about sharing and oversharing, exhibitionism in the arts. To which degree is this appreciated? That's why I want the students to also take the perspective of the listener. Will it be interesting for someone outside to hear something very personal? And another thing would be the question of personal style or artistic identity. Should you be recognized via your music? And that's also then interesting to compare, for example, with visual arts, where the personality of the artist plays mostly a much bigger role for the public and for the art market and so on. Compose a piece which conducts an experiment. You could get inspiration from psychological, chemical, physical, or sociological experiments. Read books about them. Would or could the outcome be of a scientific value? Is this artistic research? And if not, what else is it when you conduct an experiment? Is the artistic practice inventing or discovering? Normally a scientist should not invent something. And a scientist discovers the rule of relativity or so, discovers America. Experimental music, experimental jazz, experimental rock. Where and what is actually the experiment in that? Where is the experimentalism in experimentalism? Does it still exist at all? That's the question which arises here. Quick answer, I would say, is the experiment lies in the question of meaning. Do people understand what I have created in the aesthetic medium? That's always, I would say, the question, always the experiment in new music, in composing. Find a better title for Ligeti's Atmosphere. So I thought about how could I design an etude with which we practice titling. So I came up with the idea because I thought, the music of Ligeti is a masterpiece, but the title is not good. It's it sounds like the atmosphere of the piece, the mood, the ambience, but not really. Ligeti had actually a meteorologic meaning of atmosphere in mind, and also why did you use a French expression? There's no really reason why to use the French expression. Why not atmospheres? Or atmosphären? Why atmosphere? I think this title is not good, so let's think about better titles for it. And then we can talk about what makes a title a good title or what is a bad title. What I just mentioned, for instance, you shouldn't give it a French name if you're not French or if you're not are in France or if it's not played in France for the first time, then why giving it a French title? Because it sounds more poetic or what? That's not a good reason to give it a French title. Titles are important, I believe. And titles are labor. You may take 8 hours every day for a couple of days for working on a good title. And how can you work on a title? Are there strategies to find a good title? Yes, for instance, use a dictionary to come to new associations, or use ChatGPT meanwhile. May also give you at least, not maybe that title, but give you some inspiration, and some keywords that helps you then to find your title. So here is a list of from my students for better titles for Ligeti's piece. Which one should I tell? Universal Edition to rename the score. We'll see. I mean, here you also see that there's actually 2 possible thoughts. Is it a title which would fit from 1961 when the piece was composed or premiered, or do we like approxima, protuberances or so, or lines of forces? That could be a title from 1961. Okay, maybe not an English title in 1961. English title is not so, but our colloquium is in English. Whereas a title like Deep Focus to Improve Concentration sounds more like a 2023 YouTube title, yeah, ASMR, yeah. So there's two ways of, also Sprach Zarathustra 2 is probably also already kind of a postmodern title and not what somebody in 1961 would have chosen. Yeah? But then again, we can also speak about the tradition and the history of titles. There has been, again, different title fashions, one could say. In the 1980s, there was this shitload of titles with ... fragmented ... Yeah. So there were again and again certain fashions for how to title pieces. Yeah. So that leads also again to this general discussion on titles in new music. Perfect formula for the piece. Okay, at a certain point, I think I should tell the students the perfect formula for the piece. So, in the first step, I collected attributes, what the composers would like to achieve in their pieces. So, we made a list. With my music, I want to. And then we collected words like I want to entertain, I want to make people think, I want to assault, I want to overwhelm, I want to contemplate, and so on. And then we made a second list where we said, as a listener, I want to be entertained, I want to make the piece better. One student said, as a listener, I want to be shocked, I want to be provoked, or so on. Yeah? So we collected all these kinds of positive attributes for an artwork, either from the perspective of the composer or from the perspective of the listener. But that's all would be, in our thought, that would be positive attributes. And then we said, okay, now we design the perfect formula for a piece. To which percentage would be this or that, then part of a piece. So that we say, for instance, okay, I think 21% comfort zone, 40% drama, 24% challenge, 1% boringness, 5% confusion, 9% jokes. Boringness, normally would say a piece shouldn't be boring. But good composers look at the third movements of Haydn symphonies. At a certain point, it really becomes kind of boring, and then comes the fourth movement, presto, which kicks you even heavier in your ass. So this 1% of boringness, that's the real composition master is also able to include that portion. And that's why, of course, it looks a bit ridiculous to put this into this formula of percentages. But it may be, for an etude at least, and productive thinking, this 1% in your piece still is missing this 10% of challenge or so, is some, also for educational purposes, maybe helpful. Or 36% comfort zone, 31 entertainment, 15 challenge, 12 over, 1 contemplation, 5% assault, or 45% comfort, 14% oddness, 20 education, 10% consolation, 1% insult, 5% exhibitionism, 5% kidding, or 70% avant-garde, 22% integration, action and fun, random, relevation, reflection, mysticism. Or would 100% ignorance of the audience also make sense? Or doing just one thing 100%, that would be the formula for radical music. If I want to make a radical piece and I make something, it's 100% boring, it's 100% assault, it's 100% kidding, or 100%, that would be the formula for the most radical music, if that's possible at all. 100% ignorance, I think it's impossible. If you want to really ignore the audience again, then you're totally kind of connected to the audience. When you always think, I have to ignore them, I have to ignore them, I have to ignore them, then you constantly think actually of the audience. I personally say, don't ignore the audience. 100% respect the audience in a way. Which can mean, because I respect the audience so much, they need this 5% of hitting also in the face. By the way, this could also be an analysis method. You could also regard a Beethoven piece. Okay, this piece also has this kind of 40% comfort zone and entertainment, but also assault, also randomness or whatever. Compose a piece for a shoe. This time you will have to perform it, again, maximum 90 seconds. This is simply a task for your creativity. make it as musical as possible, and make it as dramatic as possible. So find musical qualities in such an object, and maybe you find surprising things. This is an alternative of an etude of my former teacher Matthias Spalinger, who wrote this etude with 3 wood blocks in a triangular space, and only eighth notes and dotted eighth notes are allowed. So it's a very limited range, where it's very hard to find actually musical qualities in such a limited setup. But there are a few, and you have to find them. And hopefully you find them, and then a form has to be built. Yeah, okay, I think this shoe you can do this or that, and now in which order do I bring these musical qualities in my piece? Yeah? So that's the same with 3 woodblocks in a triangular space, or simply with a shoe. So you make first, I would say, a list of the qualities, and then you think of in which order is it presented best, these qualities. Maybe at the end, so think of an appropriate dramaturgy, maybe at the end of the piece you throw it also at the audience or out of the window. Compose a piece in a new music style that you don't like. So question your tastes and your prejudices and try to like it. Taste can be dialectical or even a psychological thing. Something you really don't like at least seems also to define your compositional, your aesthetic thinking, yeah? Which means maybe there is something about it. I encountered more than once that when I have a strong antipathy against something, that 1 year later I'm doing exactly that. Yeah? There was something about it which at least occupied my thinking, and so your prejudices may even be a source of an inspiration. Compose a piece which demonstrates a certain craftsmanship. Do you have a specific thing of which you would say that you are a specialist in, or you have a special talent for it? Then share your expertise. I think this should be the case, at least for advanced students. There should be a specialist in something. Maybe they are specialists for themselves, so to speak. Yeah? But I guess this is also then connected to technical skills. So, for example, I had a student who was really an expert in feedback loops with contact microphones and transducers attached to instruments. There he really made lots of experiments. You could really say he was really an expert in this domain. I already showed these pieces like compose a psychological piece or compose a biological piece. This could be go on and on. So compose a mathematical piece, compose a philosophical piece, compose a religious piece or a non-religious piece. I mean, this might get a bit tiring, yeah? A bit too much now of a stereotypical design of an etude concept. Although I would say all of this would also be interesting to do. But let's go on. Compose a piece which obviously took a big effort to create within 60 seconds. Learn Marx's theory on the implications of a commodity. This is about the relationship of the time in which the piece is created and the time of the duration of the piece. As long as it is not pure improvisation, whatever that is, an artwork is always a compressed time, compressed work and labor. And this fits to Marx's observations on the implications of the commodity, which also comprise a lot of work and time, blood, sweat, and tears. Is it possible to reveal the work aspect, this work labor background of the composition process, of the creation in the piece itself? So this etude is about an aesthetic self or auto-reflection. And of course, time in music plays the decisive role. How can you somehow get an idea that the symphony of Beethoven is 70 minutes long, but it took him 3 years to compose? So it's kind of 3 years are compressed into these 3 years, or a lifetime experience is compressed then into the experience of a 70-minute symphony. I think that would be worth consideration of this time aspect of composition. A piece which works only with contrasts. Minimum 180 seconds, or the challenge would be as long as possible. So this is more maybe an inner musical etude. what's interesting here is the more contrasts you do, the less effective they are. Since always contrasts, every bar is again quite homogeneous. And the material resembles to each other more and more. So this requires to go more and more on meta levels and of extensions of the means. So in the beginning, you may just have the contrast is just between a low loud tone and a low soft tone. Yeah? And then the next contrast is between low tone and high tone. And the next contrast is between, they are quite long in duration. Then we have short durations. Next contrast is that was a violin and now it's a piano and so. But the more contrast you create, the less contrast there are. Since the more colorful it becomes, the more it becomes just gray, so to speak. Yeah? So you have to go more and more meta levels, and maybe at the end the contrast is between music and not music, or we're in this room or the other room. Yeah? Hier Oller desto doller is a slightly obscene saying in German, but maybe that's the nature of the time of a piece, yeah? Or even of history. And that's generally my opinion. A form in a piece represents eventually a philosophy of history. Compose a boring piece. Duration 20 seconds. Learn from books what boring is now. Learn from books read a lot of boring books. Yeah, hear a lot of boring music. Learn what boring. Now learn from books about the attention span, short-term memory, and how long the present actually is. I consider this a kind of impossibility. A piece of only 20 seconds can't be boring, I would say. But that's an experiment. I mean, sometimes the etudes also, for me, really experiments, see what the students come with. Is it possible to make 20 seconds long already a boring time span? We haven't tried it out yet in the colloquium, this one. Sketch processes from A to B. So again, a more of an inner musical question maybe, or since it can be quite abstracted, a question of shaping time generally, whether with sound or with colors, with lights, whatever. So the students draw curves, how to come from A to B. Yeah? And whatever this A or B is, whether the A is low tone and the B is a high tone, or A is slow tempo, B is high tempo, yeah, and so on and so forth. Or is this the time of 10 seconds, or is it a process which goes over half an hour? Yeah? And then can whatever make crazy curves, how to come from A to B, yeah? Or variation would be to A, B, and then back to A. Yeah? But this is, of course, a standard situation in composition to have. You need a certain transition from one thing to the other. A piece with complex rhythms. Not a lot to comment on that. What is complexity nowadays? Kind of a buzzword in contemporary music, but yeah, it's also a bit pretentious. Oh yeah, everything is so complex and so. Okay, let's see. What is complexity in terms of rhythm nowadays? What is the state of material, how Adorno called it, concerning rhythms? Live an interesting life. Collect field recordings. Make a piece out of them. When I showed the first composition etudes to my girlfriend, she complained, you always wanted to read books about this and that, but what about experiencing things? Yeah? What about doing things? Yeah? Not only reading about them? Oh yeah, you're right. Yeah? It's, so this could be an etude for a semester break. Yeah? Get out of the room and live an interesting life. There's no output without input before. Yeah? I have nothing against books, of course, but they're not replacing your personal experience. And for sure, we could make lots of variations or concretizations. What does it mean, interesting life? So could be specified much more, but at least I wanted to mention this here in this formulation. Create a sonic metaphor. This relates again to begriffliches Hören, conceptual listening. It is my belief that nowadays the musical material is very much conceptualized. An organ sound can represent a church, a cembalo, the Baroque era, and the silence in John Cage's 433 can be interpreted in various ways. I would say a silence is also a metaphor. And metaphorical thinking is still not so common in composers' minds, and I think this should be trained. Information, but aesthetically conveyed. A standard problem in novels is that on the first pages, the appearance of the protagonist, his hair color, his height, must somehow be told to the reader. Yeah? And meanwhile, also in music, I think, especially when there is a certain conceptual background or layer, it might be essential that the audience has to be informed on something. So I think, in my piece, Fremdarbeit, moderation is absolutely essential for the piece. So in this etude, I still also haven't concretized it, so which information. But it's something I recently came to in a lesson with Inbar. It was, we thought we should somehow also try to design an etude where it's about somehow telling people something, but of course not too didactical, not like a lesson like now, hopefully to make it aesthetic, to make it okay. And what does aesthetic actually mean then? Yeah, so it's ambitious. It's a question maybe of including video, text, performance, apps or so, and maybe questions of information theory as well. Still having much more etudes. Now, just quickly, a piece that focuses on a systematic organization of pitches or of noises or of pitches and noises, or a melody with micro intervals within a major second, with or without dynamics, a fragmentarization, I don't know if this word exists, of a piece or filter 1 minute of white noise, a piece using only overtones of one basis tone, or you get a 1 second long sample, make a 5 minute piece out of it, or just a half second sample, or just a 10th second of a sample, or the other way around, you get a 120 minute sound file, but create a 1 minute piece out of it. So find the good stuff there. A piece above 10,000 hertz, a piece below 40 hertz, a piece above 10,000 hertz and below 40 hertz, a piece that focuses on the microphone you are using, related to the famous piece Mikrofonie of Stockhausen. Compose a piece that seems to be longer than it is, again this question of time perception. Compose a piece which consists of a metamorphosis into something surprising. Compose a musical fragment which nonetheless can be regarded as a veritable piece. So what would be then the whole? There's this also a big topic was in new music, the idea of the fragment. But what if there's a fragment, there must also be something like the whole. What would be that then? Arrange sound as non-musical as you can imagine, maybe related to the bad piece. A piece which is expressive but without using dynamics. A piece which is two pieces at once. So what is the identity of a piece? A piece which consists, it starts with its climax, so it's formally quite a challenge. Compose propaganda music. Use all your musical rhetorical skills to convince listeners for something, and really no irony. I think propaganda and irony doesn't fit together. Create musical chaos. What would actually chaos be? Is it possible to create really something chaotic? And therefore, it's a good read is in Also sprach Zarathustra, Nietzsche speaks about the big worth of chaos. Use to carry chaos, and you're lucky when you do that. Make a piece in which something happens imperceptibly. So only retrospectively if you notice, oh, something has changed. So that's just a skill for a composer to create something underneath the perception in first place, glance. Make a piece which the others will regard as a political piece. There are so arbitrary definitions on what political arts, what political aesthetics is. That's why I say it must be something which is not just your opinion that is somehow politic. Now, the audience should recognize your piece as something political. So that was my idea how to design a political piece, but we'll soon also come to a student proposition for a political piece, etude, and so on and so forth. And my last etude is invent composition etudes. So in the last semester we did a lot of these etudes, and my last task for the semester was invent your own composition etudes. They have to be realized as sound files, maximum 90 seconds duration. And then read books. That could be inspiring sources from theater pedagogic or art pedagogic. Actually, in these domains, there's much more elaborate material already compared to music. Your etudes may be etudes for next semester's colloquium. We'll discuss them, and that's what we're actually at the moment doing. Now this semester we are doing some of the etudes of the students. And now let's go also in the meta discussion. Yeah? Is composing something which can or should be trained on a daily basis, like practicing the piano? Do composition etudes make sense for learning and teaching composition? I also know a composition teacher who says, to me that does not make sense at all. With my students, they only write their music. Composing is not something which you can formalize into etudes. So this opinion also exists. So my lecture not yet finished. We now come to some of the students' proposals for etudes. For instance, this one is from Abel. I think he's not here. Discover composition instead of inventing one. Yeah. So, what is newness? What is something new in the world? That's a philosophical question again. How does newness appear? By finding out, by inventing, by really creating new. What is good and bad about a strong imagination? Imagination is not only positive, I think. There is also artists who have too much of their own fantasies. Sometimes with Salvador Dali, I have the problem that he has so much in his own world, which is so rich, but it's kind of too far away from my experience. Yeah? So imagination is not only positive. Yeah? Attention awareness as compositional skills, I think, are important. And then it's again also comes even to a political question: is there a sole creator, a copyright owner of an artwork? Yeah? Or aren't we always also standing on the shoulders of giants already? Again, also a question: is this somehow related to this idea of artistic research, or does artistic research mean that I discover something instead of inventing? And already a comment on that, maybe a newborn child is neither discovered nor invented, and maybe a bit the same is with artworks. Compose a perceptual piece, that was from Michele. Yeah. So play with the perception, or play with the idea of perception. I would say perception is somehow a physical, biological apparatus, but it's also, it's my opinion, again, idea. We do listen conceptually, and it's we also have concepts in our perception with which we hear. And play with the conditions and limits of the human perception. And then the question at the end would be, is this too self-referential? We make pieces that only focus on ourselves, on our perception, how we perceive, and not really on content from outside the world. This can then be discussed. But of course, I would say our perception is our gate to the world. So when we think about our perception, we think about how we perceive the world. Compose a music piece that both you and your government would like. From Inbar, I found a great, so the Shostakovich etude, great etude also to for think about political aesthetics. Yeah? So each student according to their nationality. Yeah? And I also then advised them to consult the postmodern theory on double coding. Yeah, so that's a theory on how to combine high and low culture into the same artwork. So a bit related to here the question to think about how can I on the surface do something affirmative to the government, but subconscious, somehow subversive, on a subversive layer, something which gives the opposition to that. We did that last week now. Honestly, if I may say, was a bit dissatisfied, was still too obvious, your critique. We still have to practice that. Yeah, I mean, if you don't want to get into the gulag, so we have to learn a bit more about that, to really subtle, subversive, criticize the government. Maybe helpful. Compose a music piece in a stream of conscious way. Raphael, yeah. So as intuitive as possible, no rubbering out, just let it flow, yeah, and find a way to achieve it. Yeah? Maybe more convenient when you're writing, yeah, it could be in this kind of state of almost half asleep or so, but when working on a computer, it'll be more difficult, but maybe there is solutions for that. Yeah? I mean, I know people audio designers who are so kind of, live inside the computer almost, in the code, that they can kind of almost like in a state of trance can write code. And we'll discuss both the pieces and also your strategy, how you came in such a mind, in such a mindset of you wrote it in a stream of consciousness like way. Yeah? Here's also interesting to look at the surrealists. They had this idea of the automatic writing. Yeah? They made experiments to not sleep for 2 days and then try to write your poem or so. Of course, no drugs. Yeah, that's absolutely not part of that. Yeah. Make the most intelligent music you can imagine. That was from him. Don't give a shit on the poor intellectual level at your audience. Or imagine an audience full of Kant, Hegels, Adornos, and Arendts. Shouldn't every piece of yours be the most intelligent music you can imagine? I think so. What is intelligent music? We'll see soon. A happy piece or a piece about happiness. Where is he? Isaac. So what is happiness in music, or in new music? Yeah? To which degree is new music, is atonality, our extended instrumental techniques, not something negative but positive? It's also in aesthetics true. It's easier to imagine the end of the world than the end of capitalism. When you look at Albrecht Dürer's woodcuts on the heaven and hell, yeah? Hell is such amazing, exciting place. So much things are happening. Yeah, he could have all this, or Hieronymus Bosch, yeah, all his crazy image and imagination could put into these works. And heaven, nothing happens in heaven. Yeah, it's just pure happiness and so boring art. So quite difficult task. We'll see how that turns out. How can you actually do happy music in new music? Or maybe related a beautiful piece. From Michele again. Yeah. I also had this actually in mind. When we make a bad piece, let's also think about things like we can also a beautiful piece or a funny piece, a sad piece, a melancholic piece. So all the depressive music and euphoric music. You can think of a lot of emotional states or emotions. How could they be expressed actually in the means of new music? And does it make sense to express them? And that leads me to the next one. Write an etude which causes fear. I think it was Willy, from Willy, yeah. Here I found interesting that you said causes fear, yeah. Don't show fear, but cause it, yeah. Not that an actor is on stage doing this, but the audience is really having the emotion of fear, so we're causing it, not just showing it somehow, yeah. And here it comes to one of my favorite topics when teaching is learn about the difference between acting and performing. Yeah. I would say playing a Bach prelude is acting, it's not performing. Yeah? You are an actor who plays the role of that emotion of what it is in that piece, or you may adopt it to you. But I would think it's more performativity is more a thing in new music, but I've also questioned, do you know other examples really of performativity in music, where it's not kind of a role an actor plays, but it's really kind of the kind of psychic or physical reality which is created in sounds for the audience, to cause fear, not to just show fear. And select in famous pop albums the one sound that could be considered as summarizing or epitomizing, exemplifying the album as a whole. From Raphael again. Bit similar to my etude with we have 120 minutes and make a 1 minute piece out of this 120 minutes. Yeah. So it's again about your attention, to find the best things in a given material. Yeah. So find the good one. And maybe also related to this etude, discover a piece instead of composing something or inventing something. Yeah? So it's about attention. And make a piece without sound. That was again from Dakota. So is music defined being something audible? Or can also other media be musical? And can a composer work with them by virtue of their profession as a composer? So can a composer also write something with light? Can a composer make a music with video, a silent movie maybe? If that's possible, and I think so, prove it, please. Yeah. And then we can generally talk about an endless discussion, what is musicality, what is music. And last etude. Make a piece that ceases to exist. That's again from Dakota. So I end my lecture with this rather poetic etude. I have otherwise actually avoided using such poetic formulations. My etudes are all meant seriously as composition etudes for pedagogical reasons, not something like more or less absurd fluxus course or witty new conceptualism jokes. But here I found that would be etude as a last etude for the semester. We'll then end the semester with an etude that ceases to exist, whatever that is. Yeah? My students were very prolific, a long list of more possible etudes, so we have still material for the next 6 years of colloquium. Actually, I'm kidding, I will also do other stuff in the colloquium. Yeah? Okay, I come to a short conclusion, soon finished. When presenting these etudes, some of you now would have I would like to listen to that bad pieces or so. Okay, I can't provide this here. And first of all, I see these etudes not as concert pieces. They are taking place in that safe space of the colloquium. But one could also think of a concert format where also such etudes take place. I remember there's a pianist in Belgium, Frederick Krone, who has played a concert. They played Mozart sonatas, and between the movements he played Czerny etudes in a concert. So maybe we could also include some etudes in real concerts. But what I'm willing to do is actually announcement in April 2024. I want to make, together with my colleagues, we'll make a whole symposium on the art of art teaching here at school. And there I would also like to make a kind of performance lesson with the composition students, where on stage we do a colloquium session with a composition etude. Etudes are the prototype, or maybe one of the earliest types of conceptual music pieces. Instead of a theme, a melody, a form, one technical idea is the core of the piece, and quasi the machine that produces the work of art. So Chopin's pieces are radical concept pieces, I would say, and then later Liszt again transformed these radical pieces more into this kitsch idea of the concert etudes. Now, with having achieved a wide notion of conceptual music as part of the new music repertoire, such practice of etudes for composers could only come into existence, I think. So what is actually practiced? A writing technique, like compose a piece in a stream of consciousness way, or a topic, compose a psychological piece, or a creative challenge, compose a piece for a shoe. A reflection on aesthetics, compose a bad piece. A reflection on composing, compose a piece without listening to it. Or a reflection on the status of the composer when you invent your own, another composer's biography. Or a poetic and metaphoric compositional thinking, like make a piece that ceases to exist. Some etudes are better for individual lessons, especially longer ones, or more maybe dealing with technical issues. Others are good for group lessons. But enough for now. The plan is to once in the far future, after having collected more experiences with etudes, like the ones shown here, that we'll publish a book on composition etudes. Thank you for your attention.